Seaweed farms are sprouting up all over the world, offering potential climate, food, and coastal benefits. But a recent warning from scientists says grow too much too fast, and we could inadvertently be harming critical marine habitats like seagrass. Today, we explore on this How to Protect the Ocean podcast how this green wave might have a dark side. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you could speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about seaweed farming and how it could be negatively affecting seagrass habitats. And the one thing that I was talking to a bunch of buddies of mine, colleagues, buddies, they're really good friends of mine, are the Project Seagrass people. They were at UNOC, the United Nation Ocean Conference in Nice, France a couple of weeks ago, and we talked a lot about how seagrass takes a back seat to coral reefs. And without seagrasses, you don't really have healthy coral reefs, and vice versa. Without healthy coral reefs, you don't really have healthy seagrasses. They depend on each other. Same with mangroves. All those can be a really good system if everything is healthy, and they can secure the coastline, offer a lot of biodiversity benefits to each and every one of those habitats because they all play a role. But if they're mismanaged, then those health benefits and all those biodiversity benefits go downhill, and the entire system can be at risk. Global seaweed aquaculture comes into play here as it's being pushed because it's been valued at $17 billion US in 2023, projected to double by 2032, largely driven by the demand in Asia. So seaweed can help with carbon capture, fertilizers, food, even renewable plastics. But if it's mismanaged, it threatens vital habitats and biodiversity, just like we talked about for seagrasses. Here's the thing. When you have a seaweed farm to generate money and offer all these benefits that I just talked about, you often put it on top of a seagrass meadow, a seagrass bed, just because it offers that extra health aspect. So usually what was happening is when seaweed farms didn't have seagrass beds underneath, there was a lot of diseases which harmed the actual seaweed and its ability to create all these wonderful things. Scientists started to say, hey, you know what? Let's put the seaweed on top of seagrass beds, and then the seaweed becomes better, becomes healthier, and it becomes easier to work with. The problem is now, that seaweed is becoming a huge thing in the market. We're going to see a threat to seagrass beds, which is already starting to see threats. We've had the people from Project Seagrass a number of times on the podcast. Major threats like anchoring boats in seagrass meadows. People don't think seagrasses are a big deal. They're a huge deal. Like I said before, they have a lot of animals that rely on seagrass beds to hide from predators. They rely for food, whether it's the seagrasses themselves or the animals that hide within there. It's a plentiful area and a benefit to a lot of animals. And when you start to scrape anchors, or you start to move them around or take them out because people don't want to have seagrasses in their feet when they go in on the beach, if they're near a resort or if they're near a popular beach, you start to take away the benefits of those seagrasses. So we're already seeing a lot of pressure on seagrasses, and Project Seagrass and their partners and their networks are trying to restore seagrasses, which is very difficult to do. It's not an easy thing to do. Hasn't been done a lot before. There are a lot of projects out there. Some are successful and some aren't, depending on the type of species that they're working with, depending on the environment that they're working in. There's a lot of problems when it comes down to it. And so we need to ensure that seagrass beds and habitats are protected. The ones that are already there are protected. Having this boom of seaweed poses a risk to these seagrass beds because we are seeing less protection for these seagrass beds. And if you start to push them all in certain areas like Asia and other places, you'll start to see a reduction in the habitat of seagrasses, which is a bad thing. Something that could be detrimental to not only seagrass beds in general, but also biodiversity around the ocean and around the world, as well as just, protection for other habitats and health of other habitats and protection of shoreline. So this loss of seagrass meadows because of seaweed farms is not great. And especially in Southeast Asia. So these meadows, they support fish nurseries, oxygen production, sediment stabilization, and farming infrastructure can smother and damage these seagrass habitats. So it's not always great. Other risks are nutrient imbalance and pollution. Rapid growth may deplete nutrients. When that happens, artificial fertilizers may be used, raising eutrophication, algal blooms, oxygen depletion, and so forth. And of course, there's also invasive species and genetic spread. So farms can introduce non-native species or varieties and diseases. Escaped spores may alter local dynamics. So if you take seaweed from one place and you start to grow it in another place, so oftentimes aquaculture does, like look what it does for the Atlantic salmon. It'll take Atlantic salmon from the Atlantic and it'll grow it in the Pacific because it provides better habitat for that and a better area for that. So imagine doing that with seaweed. You have spores of seaweed that gets into a new habitat or a new environment that becomes invasive, that can take over the area, and it can cause more damage to the local area, including seagrass beds. And of course, you have coral competition. So in tropical seas, dense seaweeds can directly harm corals through shading, chemical warfare, and space competition. So seaweed can be harmful to a lot of places. So having this widespread push for seaweed farming needs to slow down. There needs to be precautions that are taken. And this is what we do as humans, as a population. We start to look at one solution. We're like, oh, this is a great solution. Let's push it to the maximum and let's ramp it up and let's do it as much as we can. And then when we do it, we start to realize that there's some damages that can happen. A lot of times we don't look at the ethics before it happens. And when we look back at it, we need to say, hey, look, these are the ethics that we need to think about. We need to go through it as a precautionary approach. Just like we're talking about when Dr. Andrew Thaler was on the podcast talking about the opportunities that we have with deep sea mining. This deep sea mining will probably go through in some cases and in some places, but we have an opportunity to do what's right. We have an opportunity to regulate the heck out of it, making sure that we are protecting the environment while doing it and going slowly and making sure that we are doing what is right. Same thing with seaweed farming. We need to proceed with caution. Do study pilots. Make sure they go on for years and make sure we are looking at how this affects seagrass habitats as well as a seaweed as a product and making sure that we're protecting it. Also, just looking at, hey, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't put seaweed farms everywhere we see seagrasses, because seagrasses are important, and we know that the seaweed farms can actually harm the seagrass beds. It's hard to say both of these. So that could be a big problem. So these are something that we have to see. So some real world examples are having in Southeast Asia and the Western Indian Ocean. Some farms have outright replaced seagrass habitats, which is not good. And in the UK, marl beds, ancient red algae formations, are being smothered by fast growing farm species fostered by nutrient runoff. So obviously not a good thing. Now the upside is seaweed does help remove nutrients from coastal waters, use in integrated and multi-trophic systems to treat eutrophic water. So there are some benefits to it. And some farmers have turned sargassum overgrowth into sustainable products such as fertilizer, building materials, and even feedstock. So there are some benefits. The key here is proceed with caution. This is something that we say with everything. Just like I said, when we ramp things up too quickly, things get out of hand. So the expert takeaways and guidelines, scientists argue that we need zoning to avoid sensitive habitats and nutrient budgeting before scaling up the farms. Proceed with caution, just like I said. Regulations should restrict non-native strains and mandate monitoring and adaptive management, and then learn from shellfish aquaculture, riparian buffer zones, and integrated systems to design low-impact seaweed farms. There are ways to go about this the right way. Pushing this and ramping up too fast where there's no guidelines or the guidelines aren't being followed can really damage seagrass beds for the long term. And that's not what we need. There are not enough seagrass beds around. There's not enough money put into the restoration and protection of seagrass beds. They are a habitat that is vulnerable to not only extinction and extirpation in certain areas, but degradation and just bad health is really what it comes down to. So seaweed farming is not the silver bullet, but when guided by smart science and regulation, it can be powerful too. I highly recommend that they team up with seagrass scientists and making sure that things are done science-based and the decision-making is science-based and the management is science-based. Do you get the theme here? Science-based rules. This is what we need to do when we go forward with seaweed farms. We're not saying the seaweed farms are bad, but when you start to put seaweed farms over seagrass beds every single time, and that starts to be widespread and scales up, that could be detrimental to seagrass beds, detrimental to biodiversity, detrimental to shoreline security, and detrimental to the ocean in general. Let's ensure we harvest solutions without uprooting the foundations of marine life. That's really what it comes down to. I'm going to stop it there. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think that seaweed farms should be scaling up without any of these guidelines? Or how do you think these guidelines should be implemented? Should they be mandatory in different regions of the world? Love to hear your thoughts. You can hit me up in the comments below. If you're listening to the audio podcast, you can hit me up on the website. Go to speakupforblue.com/contact. Fill out the form. It goes right to my email, or you can DM me on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. And if you want more ways to guide you to better ocean action, join the Undertow. Go to speakupforblue.com/join the Undertow. That's speakupforblue.com/join the Undertow. I want to thank Dr. Benjamin Jones and Dr. Richard Unsworth for writing this article in the conversation. I'm going to link to that below. And I want to thank you for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin from the True North Strong and Free. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.